Hello, everyone, and welcome. Now officially, my name is Zena, and I am the second part of Inco Club. If you joined last time, you had a chance to see and meet a bit Diana, who is joining today as well, and she will be today in the more background techie side of the event. So should there be any problems with the connections or you would need something, she will be there to help. So just ping her in the chat and you will sort it out, I'm sure. And it's my pleasure to also welcome the two special guests we have today, which is Andre and Celine. I will hand over to them in a minute. Just before we start a little bit of the organizational boring stuff, but necessary to keep the space clean and the webinar and everything running smooth. So you already all are on mute, which is great. So please keep it that way if you are not our guest panelist. So that doesn't apply for Andre and Celine. And it's not that we wouldn't like to hear from you, it's just so that we don't get echo and sounds in the background, but we will make sure that there is a space at the end of the webinar where you can join us and ask your questions if you feel like talking. So there you will be most welcome to unmute yourself. And if you have any questions or comments in the meantime, or you just want to drop something in the chat so you don't forget, feel free to do so. So you can use the chat as much as you want. And last thing that I wanted to remind you or tell you, the webinar is recorded. So if you don't wish to be recorded, I would ask you to turn off your camera and you possibly can change the name if you also don't wish your name to be displayed there. Otherwise, if you are okay with it, I will be most happy to see your faces in reaction. So if you are okay with it, please keep your cameras on to at least create this sense of feeling that we are all together in one room. That would be, I guess, I hope, all from the organizational perspective. And now comes the time when I will hand over to our guests, and I will start with Celine and ask her if she could introduce herself.
Yes, thanks, Susanna. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Celine. I'm originally from Belgium. If you hear a slight Irish accent, it's because I've lived in Ireland for about 5 years. I've been in tech for over 10 years now. Originally started my career in technology, specifically more on the LinkedIn side. So worked on the recruitment solutions, worked in advertising solutions. Moved back to Belgium to work in the sales enablement space for a company called Showpad. And now most recently, I work for Happio. So I'm the VP Customer Success at Happio, a social intranet solution. And so obviously in my role, I work a lot with customers from the moment that they have signed until their continued success with our solution. So yeah, like I said, happy to be here, and hopefully we'll be giving you an interesting next 50 minutes before we send you all off to enjoy some sun.
Thanks a lot, Celine, and we are happy you joined us. And now if I could ask you, Andre, to introduce yourself, please.
Sure. So my name is Andre Schwartz. I've been in Avast now for 3 years at the position of Senior Project Manager and Vendor Manager, so responsible for projects related mainly to IT and infrastructure and technology in general, as well as end-to-end implementation of internal systems support systems, and so on. Recently, I moved to a new role of procurement manager at Avast, where I'm responsible for managing Avast sourcing capabilities and supply chain for the product organization. Before that, I worked for some time for KPMG. I've spent 3 years studying in the Netherlands and half a year in Warsaw. And apart from my duties, my current duties at Avast, I'm also helping my friend with a startup company which focuses on simulation technologies and in the aviation industry. So that's about me. Thank you for giving me a chance to actually be here with you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your introduction and for joining us, Ondra. And before we jump into the questions and the discussion, I have one more thing, which is a poll. And we would like to ask you about the state of tooling in your company. I hope it will work. It's the first time we are using Zoom polling, so please be patient with us. I'm launching it now, and hopefully you should be able to see it. Do you? Yeah, now someone's voting, so something's happening there. Perfect. So we have 50% of votes. Okay, 5 out of, great. And 7 and 8. Okay, so 100% the people that could vote voted. Thank you for that. I am ending the poll, which was super quick, and the results are that 50% of you feel that your company uses the tools well. 25% of you don't feel that your company is using the tools well, and 25% of you don't know, are not sure about the state of tooling in your company. Perfect. Thank you very much for joining us in this poll, and also for trying out this feature with us that I am sure we will be using also throughout the next webinars. And it already leads me to my first question, and that would be about the state of tooling in companies. Because in most of the companies that I have worked with, the situation was that people kept complaining about tools and about not having enough tools. And they kept requesting new and new tools, or to say toys, and it made me wonder whether the situation is that companies don't have enough tools, don't have proper tools, or they're just not using them properly. And that would be my question first to Celine. Do you think that companies, from your experience, companies don't have enough tooling, or they are not just not using it properly, or they didn't implement it properly, they didn't do a proper rollout, so now people are not sure how to use them to the fullest?
Yeah, and I think it's a funny question to start with, and I definitely think that there's definitely certain companies that don't have enough tooling, and specifically actually larger companies that I've worked with tend to have less tooling, tend to try and build a lot of things internally as well, or kind of hold on to like what they've been used to in the past. And so I think there's definitely companies out there that don't have enough tooling, but what I think the majority is that companies that do have the tools kind of presume that the tool will solve the problem that they have in their head. And so that kind of link from, I want to solve problem A, this is a tool that will do that, that link is made too quickly. And I think a lot of people think that the tool will solve the problem, but it's just a vehicle to solve the problem, really. And it really requires a good in-depth thinking and then strategy session on like, what is the actual problem that we're trying to solve here? Because a lot of the times, like even 5 people saying, I want, a project management tool, but actually all 5 of them will try and solve a different problem with that same tool. So I do think there's a lot to be said about making sure that you have a good thinking process before, like, what is the problem that we're solving here or trying to solve, and then how can that tool be the right solution for it. But it's never going to solve your problem without having a proper strategy behind it. And far too often, I think we just go straight into the tool because that sounds the easiest, but that's a recipe for failure in my humble opinion.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think we will touch upon that many times today, that tools are not the solution for the problems, and that they are just a tool and way how to help yourself with the problem, but are not the solution themselves. Awesome. Andre, do you have anything to add? Do you have... Go ahead.
I totally agree with Celine, and I think she made a really good point. I think that it's also with companies that have been here for a while and that have some history. The problem is especially that you're talking about some legacy systems that people are used to, that have been here for ages and are from preferably a category of DIY, of do-it-yourself, or some custom developed from some prehistoric market solution. It's always like there is an argument that it's been here for ages, that it's working well, so why should we change it, right? But people, they don't realize just how much effort and how much time they're spending on the administration and the integration of that solution just to keep it up and running and up to date, right? So in my opinion, what I think is important, that you need to realize the system that was built back then, what really were the requirements, like how it was built, and if it's still up to date, if it still serves the purpose that it was built 5 years ago. So you really need to focus on what is your primary business, and need to realize that as you are growing and you're moving your business forwards, the other companies that are specializing on development of such tools are also developing. So you really need to research on the market what really is, and really think of what is your primary business and focus most of your energy on that. You shouldn't be wasting your time.
If I can quickly add to that, maybe I think as well, like to what Andre was saying, like some systems or tools are there, like they've been there for so long that like people are just like used to it, and so you don't kind of reflect on it. And I think doing kind of what we're actually doing right now at Happio as well is like a tooling audit, and it is literally just looking at like who is actually the owner of certain tools and who are the users. Because I think a lot of the times, like in a lot of enthusiasm, you might add people onto the tool in the initial stages, but actually after a year or so, you kind of realize like that audience probably isn't the right user for that tool. And so kind of just having that kind of cycle of like tooling audits can really be helpful, just to keep it clean and identify the gaps also a lot quicker and easier.
Perfect. Yeah. And it leads me, or it's the perfect bridge for my next question, which would be when I think as a company, or I feel that I may need a new tool, are there any stages? You were mentioning the tooling audit. So should that be, for instance, a first thing where to start before I can even say I really need a new tool? Or is there any proper way or some stages that should be really hit before I go and purchase something or implement something?
Yeah, I think a tooling audit can definitely help identify this in a way, but it starts again from a tool perspective. I think with any kind of request or problem that you have, you want to start with just a problem definition. Like, what is the actual problem that I'm trying to solve? And I think in a way as well, like if you're thinking about potentially buying a certain solution, it's like, what are my must-haves, right? Once you have that problem definition, like what are my must-haves, what are my nice-to-haves, and then it's also important, I'd say, to kind of see, like, as a company, like, can we make this a priority? Can we make a project around this? And can we actually tie resources to it? Because that is always going to be the case when you're deciding to start a new project and that involves like implementing a tool. You're going to need resources, right? And that doesn't need to be like a massive amount of resources, but there will always be somebody who has to lead it, who has to help implement it. And so I think it's important to make that kind of consideration as well before you go into any kind of, selection of vendors or anything like that. So really problem, definition, making sure as a company, like, is this really something that we will be able to execute once we have made our decision? And then I think just doing your market research, I think is obviously an important one as well. Like once you have your list of nice to haves, must haves, like what is out there in the market, look at G2 Crowd, just do your research there. That kind of seems like a given as well before you engage with any vendor there as well. And then I think it's just a matter of, going through that process of doing discovery together with the vendor, like trust in a way as well, and that's not just me saying because we are the vendor here, but, as a vendor, you do have quite a lot of expertise in the area that you're in, right? And so I think it is important to make sure that you have that kind of relationship and you have that trust relationship. If that is not the case, then you probably don't want to continue with that vendor either. But make sure that you get those insights, you get that knowledge throughout that process. And then I'd say typically there is like maybe a trial phase. I don't think it's always necessary, to be honest. I think if you really have done all the pre-work, that you don't necessarily always need a trial, but it is definitely something that can be handy when you do want to get your hands dirty and really see what it is like. But I think it just honestly depends on like how much pre-work you have done. So I think the selection piece is really the last step in already a process that has quite a few steps before that one.
Mm-hmm.
I think in my sorry.
No, I just wanted to ask if it's different from the inside perspective, you being on the side of the company and selecting the vendors, if the stages or phases you need to go through are different, or
no, I think they're exactly the same. I believe that if you have a trusted vendor that you're cooperating with, that you know him, you have reference about him, then yeah, I do believe that there is not always the need to do some kind of demos or POCs or whatever. I'm though a fan of double checking always. That's just the way I am. And what I wanted to add to what Celine was saying, I think that it's important that people like realize or actually learn from their mistakes, because what I see as like with the companies that I work with and with the people that I work with, it's usually like you restart something and you don't go back to what you have done wrong in the past, right? Because that's important. And the second thing is that people are quite often following the book, following the textbook, which is wrong. I know that, the wheel has been invented, whatever, but it's important to use common sense in this, it's nothing else. And that's important. Mm-hmm. I believe is the key.
Just to clarify, you use term POCs. Can you say what POCs mean?
Proof of concept. So basically,
okay. Great. And we had comment to that from Diana, I think, and Michaela reacting. And I'm going to use it to ask my next question, which would be, have you ever met a CEO or someone on the C-level that on one side comes with requests for tools just because it's the next new cool thing and they just want the gadget and the toy for the sake of the toy, and how to work with that when it's someone on the C-level? And on the other hand, what if on the C-level there is a distrust and people are more to what Ondra was referring to, that, well, we have the tools, they work, so let's just not touch them. So if it's not completely broken, we are not changing anything. So these two sides of the same coin, how to work with it, and what's your experience in that?
I think this is on a regular basis that somebody comes and, he finds a new tool, and it doesn't have to be the CEO or the C-level. It can be anybody. It can be from the innovations lab or whatsoever, And there always needs to be somebody who has the critical thinking and looks at it realistically and objectively to actually say, like, if it's really needed, you need to do due diligence. That's important always. But I have that from my personal experience. I mean, there are times where, for example, the CEO or somebody comes and asks you to implement that, and that it's not 100% correct. But I mean, what can you do? It's really hard to convince those people. On the other hand, those people also tend to lose interest very, very quickly. And it's always like the balance that you need to do between both,
Yeah, and I think definitely, I think we've all experienced it. And I think also whenever, and specifically when it's a C-level or the CEO, when he or she says something, there's always something underlying, right? There's a reason why, like if somebody would come to me and say like, you need to implement a CS tool, then my initial reaction will be like, what are you trying? Like, where are you seeing a gap that you are saying to me, we need to implement this, because I know that we're not ready for it. And so I think asking that question, and it comes back to doing that pre-work, right? So no matter where the question comes from, it's always just asking like, but what problem are we trying to solve here? And I think in a lot of cases, in the first one of somebody being too overexcited about a new tool, I think you can kind of counter, the whatever gap that he or she sees, and maybe, explain what you are doing instead. If the tool is just not the right solution right now. And I think the same thing actually goes in the other case where, and that also happens, where you feel as like a department owner or something like that, like we really need this, because you're in a day-to-day, because you see many examples of where there are gaps, where there are opportunities to do better, to collaborate better. And I think it's just a matter of making sure that you have your case and that you collect all of those examples where you see those gaps, and that you really show like, this is the tool stack that we have, and this is what we use it for. And here is in our cycle of collaboration or customer handling or whatever it is, here is where we see a gap. And then let's first get a yes on like, you're right, this is a gap. Then come with, okay, well, we actually have a tool that will fill that gap. Can we now talk about it? And I think if you come with that kind of reasoning, you'll probably get a lot more success than just, I need, whatever, 30, 40K to buy a XYZ.
Mm-hmm. And that brings me to one question, which is more to the vendor side. Does it happen that you say to the customer, or some company comes to you and says, we want this cool tool that you have, and after the discussion you say, you don't need us, you don't need this tool, or you need to sort something else out? Or just because you're the vendor and you should be selling, you always rather find a way how to work together?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I definitely want to say, and I think it's actually one of the topics that we are even discussing internally, like with anything, right? You want to think long term. So if at any stage a vendor is going into a conversation where we feel like, oof, this is not the right fit, but we're going to try and make it work just to get that deal in, that's not long-term thinking. And like, I'm from the customer success side, right? And this is where we feel the pain, because a customer won't be successful, and it won't be a nice relationship. And that is absolutely not what we want to stand for. And I think a lot of vendors have that. So I think that's also part of like, testing that relationship when you're looking out for a new tool. Like, there needs to be that connection. There needs to be that feeling of like, this vendor actually knows what they're talking about, and we can trust them as well. And I think it all comes down to really challenging. We have a lot of companies that would come to us and that either haven't really defined their problem well enough, and we can sometimes help them with that. And maybe we send them back for like, you know what, I think internally you might want to talk with, a couple of more people, and let's reconnect in 2 months. And I think sometimes that is a lot better, a much better approach than kind of just pushing through a solution, because like I said, the solution is never going to be, or the tool is never going to be the solution to your problem. It really is just the vehicle. So I think if we are true to ourselves, we don't do that.
Even from the customer point of view, from my point of view, it's important to see the vendor or the partner like as a partner, not as a competition, basically, because he's there to help you, And as Celine was saying, like, if somebody wants to make a cash cow out of you, really, like, to take out the money, you're going to realize it sooner or later, unless you're really, stupid. So, yeah, that's very important, and it's very short-sighted if a vendor or a partner is doing that. So, yeah, I completely agree with her.
And we have there a discussion in the chat that I believe also touches upon the question of ownership. Kind of, I think that it will be also answered a bit in when we talk about rollout and switching to a certain tool or not switching, and willingness of people to use certain tools. But now connected to what we were talking about, how do you see ownership when it comes to new tool? When I need a new tool, let's say I need a new intranet, and I am from internal comms team. I request new intranet, I create some project for it. Am I the owner? And should it be me deciding stuff, or how does that work in the relationship-wise? Or is it IT because they will be implementing, or what's the best practice, I would ask?
I'll probably take that. I think that's more customer related. Basically, you need to make differences, right? There is a difference between system owner and business owner. System owner is whoever administrates the system, whoever is setting it up and making sure that it works properly, that it's up to date, and that all of the boxes are blinking the way they are supposed to. And in my opinion, that's IT. Business owner, that what you've been describing, is the one who sets up the processes and the logic, how the system should be tailored so that it brings basically the benefits that you're looking for. And that really depends on the maturity of that organization, also about the size, about the number of employees. But I believe that those two should be separate at all times. It shouldn't be a one person doing both business owner and system owner. It really doesn't make sense, because in the long run, it's going to create issues.
Yeah, I fully agree. And it is actually something that, like, when we are in a conversation with a potential customer, and it is just the business owner reaching out typically, we will definitely ask as well, like, who else needs to be involved here? Because we know from experience that that is the case, and that is only successful when there is indeed like a system owner as well. When you're thinking about an intranet solution, like, this is a solution that is for typically all employees, right? So there's a lot of people that are involved. There's going to be a lot of different teams that will contribute to making content. There is a HR team probably in there as well, who might want to measure engagement through the platform, things like that. So I think it's super important to really push for that. But again, I think a lot of companies kind of go into, oh, I have an idea and I think this will work, and I'm just going to talk to somebody. But it really requires that kind of like collecting feedback, bottoms up as well, confirming that everybody is on board with this project, and knowing, like, down the line, I'm going to need IT 100% to make this successful. So you better involve them in the pre-sale side as well.
Mm-hmm.
You really need to divide the responsibilities. Like, again, what Celine was saying is, if from my experience, if there is like business owner who also is the system owner, it's going to end up in disaster. It's like if you, I don't know, come to give it, like, you want to work with your child and you want to cook, right? And you ask him to bring whatever he needs, right? So he's not going to bring a pan and oil and, I don't know, potatoes. He's going to bring, I don't know, a car, something else.
Lego.
Yeah. So that's the difference. It's what we were saying before. It's like, the tools that you want to play with, and that's exactly the way. So you should divide those. And again, there's things like shadow IT and etc., which are explained in various documents, but it's easy, it needs to be separated. You need to have a system owner, you need to have a business owner. If you combine those together, it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. And well, I was also asking from a bit of a selfish reason, because it's kind of happening to me now that I should be using the intranet, but IT has all the rights and admin rights and I don't. So I have to create tickets and ask for every single space to be let in. Which leads me to another question, which is whether when the when I inherit something, I'm a new person coming into the company. I should be leading, for instance, internal comms, and I already have the tools there. They were bought, they were somehow implemented, and it doesn't work for me. Is there a way to fix it? And if so, how do I do that? Like, can I come back to the vendor and say, hey, I am the new person here, you implemented that, can we have another round and maybe to reset and shuffle things a bit around because it's not working for me and for my needs as the new person, or there is no way I can fix the things that weren't done properly before?
Yeah, I'll jump in because it's definitely going to make at least the vendor is going to be happy, because of course it's going to mean income for him. Not that I want to, address something, but basically, it's probably the only way that you can do. But if you end up in that kind of situation, and I know it probably wasn't your fault, but now you're the one who's responsible for it, right? So in the end, it is your sandbox. And the first thing is actually that you need to admit that there is something wrong, or you have done something wrong, or somebody else have done something wrong. That's hard, though. That's really hard. Not many people can do that. But unless you're able to say that or actually come up with that, you're screwed. It's you really have to admit that something was wrong and that you need to plan like how you're going to correct it, what you're going to do, and you need to come basically with steps like of the correction process. And
It is definitely a tough situation to be in, but I think a lot of people actually, encounter that. And I think it is important to realize or to investigate, like, are you the only one who feels like this is just not serving our needs? And like, do that check as well. Like if you're mentioning like IT now has control, but actually like that is limiting me in my capabilities, like let's just have that conversation with IT and like understand, because maybe they also are like, this is causing us way too much work and I would prefer if somebody else does it, or maybe they actually like control for whatever reason. So I think having that conversation and really just aligning on like, is it a problem for you as well as for me? Then I think at least that's the first step. But having to work with something that wasn't implemented well is definitely a challenge. I think in general, to be honest, like having a new person joining a team or someone responsible for any tool, I think is a good thing, because it will always bring like new ideas. And yes, it might just bring like a whole like change, worldwide of change again, but I think it's really a good thing. And we also like often recommended it to our customers as well. Like if it's been the same team over and over, bring somebody new in, get some new perspective in. And I think you can turn it around, but it does require first alignment, I'd say internally, and then seeing if you want to do a full relaunch. And I think a full relaunch of an existing solution can only be successful if you really call out what went wrong before. Because if you don't do that, then people are just going to be like, are we doing this again? And the only way I think you can kind of like counter that initial reaction is like, hey, we did this, X amount of years ago. This is where we saw some failures. This is where we saw some gaps. Like, let's be transparent about it. And then these are the things that we're going to do to solve them. And I think that is the only way, like full transparency, and from my experience at least, is the only way that you can save a bad implementation.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you very much. It gives me some hope. And maybe I would ask, what is because we mentioned implementation, we mentioned launch or rollout. Can we talk about the differences? What is the difference between implementation and launch of a tool or rollout of a tool?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, if you look at implementation, it's the entire process of implementing a solution. And so that typically involves lots of different stakeholders. There's like a technical stream, like how are we going to embed this into our workflows? There's probably like a content stream, who needs to provide and make content, things like that. There's a change management stream. There's a communication stream. Like you'll identify in a project management way, you'll kind of identify all these different streams, and they're all an integral part of like an implementation. The implementation kind of ends up with a launch, and a launch is typically just it could be a big bang launch or it could be a soft launch, but it is an introduction to this is the new solution that we're doing to your audience. The rollout is the effectively like usage of that audience of the tool. So it's that implementation is a lot of like stuff that's happening in the background. It can take up, a couple of months, depending on how much pre-work you've done. If you've done a lot of pre-work before you even bought the solution, it goes a lot quicker. But there's a lot of like work behind the scenes, unseen by the actual end user that happens in implementation up until that moment of launch. And then it's making sure that everybody knows how to access it, knows how to use it, and goes back to the solution as well. So it's definitely not, the project isn't done after implementation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like Celine was saying, implementation is all that, define of the workflow, strategy, setup of the environment, and prepare the target audience for whatever is coming. And I think she said it very correctly, because the rollout is the really tiny phase where you actually realize whatever you have done wrong. The implementation, because that's where actually it comes out and actually you realize that stuff isn't working. And really, you need to really do your homework before you go into that point and really prepare every kind of scenario, because whatever you don't do during the implementation phase is going to catch you later on, and is going to.
Exactly. And I think that's a soft launch typically helps kind of prevent having like, problems at a larger scale, right? So start with like a smaller group, identify like some feedback, some gaps that you maybe have missed, because you won't always know until people actually get their hands dirty and into the solution. And then that can definitely help to then feed that back to like the bigger rollout. So definitely, I'm definitely a fan of like a soft launch as well, just to be on the safe side and to make it even more perfect when you do launch. But perfect is really the wrong word, because it's never going to be perfect. It's never a finished product. It needs, and especially in internal comms, like bottoms up feedback and input is so crucial. So it can't just be something that like gets implemented and decided from above and like, here you go, and then that's it, hands off. Like it never is the case, and especially not in internal comms.
Mm-hmm. And that was actually thing that I wanted to ask about, how far along in the implementation internal comms should start talking about it. From your experience, is it better to wait until everything is perfect, and maybe even after the soft launch, before we even start talking about the fact that we have a new intranet or we have a new instant messaging tool? Or should we start preparing the audience before it all happens and start teasing? From your experience, what's the better way, how to approach it from the internal comms perspective?
I would say it's not about preparing your audience, it is involving them. And not your entire audience, obviously, but especially in internal comms, like it's so important to get their opinion throughout, and then really just ask them the question, like, what is it that you want to see in an intranet solution? Things like that. Or what is it that we need to communicate about more internally? When we talk about internal comms, like, what is it that you're missing? And I think so you can't just be silent until it's all ready and here you go. So you need to involve them, or at least like selected group of people. So I think that is a very important piece as well. And in general, I'm just a fan of like having a lot of transparency, even at the point where you're like, we've identified a gap. Like that is super powerful in organizations. And again, especially in internal comms, because I think it's such an important driver of engagement and all of these things. So identifying as a company, like, hey, we've identified a problem. It relates to internal comms. we're actually going to solve it, like stay tuned, right? And then kind of just like do some type of drip campaigns, like, oh, this is coming, this is what we're working on, we want your feedback, we want your input, like involve them, create that kind of buzz throughout, so that when it does come out, people aren't surprised, people aren't, just reluctant to change, because they've already had that time in their head, like, oh, something new is coming and I need to get ready. Because a lot of people make the mistake that when you want to launch like a new solution or things like that, like you might have been working on it for like months. And so for you, it's like, oh, yeah, this is happening. But for somebody who, heard this last week, that person will still be like, no way, I'm just going to stick to do what I'm used to doing. So involve them. Really, it's not just about prepping them, it's really about involving them, I would say.
Yeah, the phasing of the communication, I think, is very important, because as Celine was saying, like you get a feedback on everything that you do, right? And you can learn from that. You can see the reactions, how people are reacting whatsoever. If you do one huge article, you're probably going to get a response like, I don't know, too long, didn't read, something like that. And people do lose interest. It's the same way if you do phase it and you communicate way too much, people do lose interest and people do get annoyed quite quickly. So you really need to balance it. But I think, and Celine was saying that, like involving the audience since the beginning is very important, and preparing them what's coming. It's.
Mm-hmm. And to that, I would add Aga's question, because I think it's also related to the release and rollout and the change management. And that says, I have worked in two different types of environments. One where people wanted as many tools as possible because of different features. And then another where people want to stick to one specific tool, even when it's not sustainable. Any advice for the latter, especially when new tool comes with a huge behavior change required from employees? So when it's changing completely how people work, is there any advice from your side how to make sure that the change management and the change in the behavior goes smoothly? What the whole team working on it shouldn't forget, otherwise people will not want to use it or won't use it properly?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're coming back to the question when we were talking about like a person that wants to play with a lot of toys, right? And it's usually the case, especially in large organizations. People come with ideas like, hey, we want this, we want that. You need to have a centralized governance above it. And you really need to have the parent who strictly says like, who's strict and who limits the use of certain items and really does the oversight of whatever is in the company. Because usually you end up, and I see that quite often, that you end up that every single department has some kind of a tool and they're using it because they like it. But in the end, you find out that you're paying a lot of money just for a tool that is doing exactly the same thing. So that's why I was saying that you should have this centralized in one like IT organization that should do the oversight. You have software asset management, you have all these people that look at it, and not only from the perspective like how effectively the tool is used, but also from a perspective of, for example, license auditing, right? That's also very important. And in large organizations, that can mean the difference between having 100 million and losing 100 million. Because if, for example, an audit from Microsoft or something comes, and they find out that you're missing some licenses, it can be an issue. That's why it's important to have those centralized at one place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, definitely having central governance, having some oversight and control, I think is super important. I think all of that kind of goes back to like when you mentioned about people wanting to stick to their habits. Change management is obviously something that has only gained more importance, I'd say, as we learned how to implement new solutions. And I think change management, there's a lot of different tactics that you obviously can use. For me, there's a couple of things that I think are crucial for anything everything to succeed from that perspective. I'd say having exec leadership buy-in, make them kind of the voice or the face of the change is super powerful. It has to be somebody up there who says, like, this is why we're doing it. Not what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. I think the second piece we talked about is make sure that they're involved. Ask them as well, like, what do you need to see then? If you're used to, doing this, why do you like using it? Okay, let me tell you what's in it for you if we do it the other way. The kind of element of what's in it for you is super important as well. So then you kind of have that like bottoms up and top down, which is super important on the one hand. I think the other piece is like, make sure it's whatever you're doing, whatever new tool you're introducing, make it part of people's workflow so that they can't even escape from it. Because sometimes you do need to force people's hands and you just need to force them into the solution, right? So make it their homepage, make it like, you need to cut off all the other information sources, like make it a single source of truth. There's a lot of companies that are super afraid of doing that. But it is honestly one of the most effective things that you can do. And you don't have to do it on day one, right? You can say like, yeah, we're going to do kind of a gradual transition. Like right now, you might still find that information here. We're going to also put it on, the solution, whatever it is. But then slowly like prepare them. Like at some point there's a cutoff. And then if people come to you with questions like, where can I find this or whatever, just send them towards the new solution. And slowly but surely, like they will find their way to it. So it's a part of involving, it's a part of like making sure there's a voice and a face of that change, but there is definitely also a bit of forcing them in a nice, productive way to the new state that you want to bring them in.
Yeah, people by nature are lazy. There are only really a few who are willing to step outside of their comfort zone, and really like introducing something new and asking them to get rid of something that they were used to is putting them way out of their comfort zone if you do that like really quickly. So you really need to be prepared for that. There is going to be some kind of resistance sooner or later, and you really need to be patient. It's again, it's like with the child. When you are going to force them something they don't know or they don't like, they will scream and make a scene about it, right? With adults, it's quite often the same. So really the key is to make them actually realize that they actually want the change to happen. So yeah, gradually making them aware of the tool and showing them how to do it.
I think patience is the most important word that you mentioned there, right? Like I completely agree. You need to have that patience. We mentioned it before, like you might have been working on this for like months and you've gotten used to that idea. For a lot of people, it will be something new. So have patience and then at some point just cut them off and it will be absolutely fine.
Let them fly.
Yeah, it's a shame that Michael already left because I was wondering if you have screams and people shouting at Avast when you change stuff. But to that, my only struggle is that sometimes we have to communicate or get people's buy-in for something that has its value in the future, that it's not something they need for their work now. But as we are growing as a company and we are moving to different stage, we need that. We know that we need that tool for the future, but we struggle to explain the benefit for the people now. Any advice there? Anything that works for you? How to transition the people when it's something that the company needs in the future, but not necessarily now, but we already need to start implementing and rolling out?
Yeah, I think it summarizes all of that, what we've been discussing. So first thing is, like Celine was saying a few minutes ago, it's transparency and honesty. So really like, don't drag them by their noses, basically, like, say that flat, like what is happening and what are the plans, unless it's very super like secret, which can happen, of course, especially during acquisitions, etc. You don't know, like you're going to suddenly grow by 50, 100%. So, there might be things that you just can't know because of some, I don't know, stock restrictions, etc. But really, you need to gradually start preparing them and showing them how, and slowly adapting them to the change and making them realize that basically there is no way back, you know?
Yeah, I think it's painting that future picture and providing them that context. It's also fair to say that like not everybody in their specific role will necessarily like realize what the impact is of what they're doing on the bigger picture, or will see the problems that maybe of the current state, what that will be on the bigger picture later on. So I think it's just a matter of providing them that context first of all. And I think that in itself will help. And then I think also just like challenge people, right? Like I have had that quite a lot where people are like, oh yeah, but we're doing it like this and it works. And then when you ask like, yeah, but how would you see that scaling if we have like all of a sudden 5 more people in our team? Like, are they then all going to email you to get that information, or do you not think that maybe it would be better if you actually would document that information, you know, as just a random example? And I think just challenging them on it and making them think about like, how is this actually going to scale? I think that can help as well, so that they come to the conclusion themselves, realizing like, I might do it this way, but if there's like 10 people knocking my door tomorrow, like, yeah, that's true, that's not feasible. Okay, tell me, what do I need to do to make this different? And then probably with the right context, you have them along in your story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. Both of you, what you were saying, it very much resonates. So thank you for that. It's helping me as well, thinking about some of the tools and their introduction. We have 2 questions from Diana, and one is, who's usually the implementation project owner? And is it internal comms or IT? And or should there be someone from PMO involved? So we partially answered that already in the ownership, but just maybe to kind of talk about it more.
Yeah, sure. It's again referring to child's play, but again, it's like having a playground. I'm sorry, I do that quite often. I realize I guess I'm spending too much time with my son. But anyways, it's imagine like you have a playground basically, and you have, you know, all the toys there. Everybody's playing with something, and you need to make sure that everybody's playing the same game. You know, that everybody's doing what they're supposed to, and that nobody's actually left behind. You know, and that's why you need the PMO, or it doesn't have to be PMO. It just needs to be a person who is mature enough and who is experienced enough to actually coordinate the whole process and make sure that all of the people are playing with the same game. It's all about that, you know, and actually that person can be really, the person has to have like a helicopter point overview to really see it from the top and to see like how everything is progressing. You know, if it's a person who is dig down in there and doesn't see over the borders, you know, you can't do that. It's really, you have to think outside of the box. You have to be above it and to see like how all the screws and all the machinery is actually working together.
Yeah, I think that's a super valid point. And I love that you said somebody who has a certain level of maturity. And I do think that is very true in internal comms specifically. It is very different project managing like an internal departmental project versus internal comms that typically is across all different teams, departments, and all layers in the organization. You do need to have somebody who has some body behind them, basically, to have those conversations, to make sure that people deliver on time, to make sure that people are bought in. So I do think that is important. It doesn't necessarily have to be PMO. Depends on the size of the project, I think, as well. But the second piece, and I think and I can't believe why I hadn't brought it up before, actually, but I think as well what is crucial is in an ideal world, for me, the one managing the project or the owner of the solution is the one that will also have KPIs tied to whatever the result and outcome is. And that typically leads to quite a lot of friction, because if you look at it from an IT perspective, and it is literally just about like getting it launched and these are the KPIs, like just making sure that people have access, things like that, versus from an internal comms perspective, it might be more around engagement and like content creation and things like that. It is very difficult to have KPIs on one team yet the owner of the solution on the another team. So I do think that you need to look at these two, and I feel like if those two aren't aligned, it's going to be super hard to make it a success in the long run. The deployment might be fine, but making it successful in the long run is very, very difficult. So having KPIs in the first place is important. Having them with the right team who has ownership over the solution is going to bring you a very long way.
Great points from both of you.
You have to realize that,
No, go ahead.
That like the IT is in this sense, or the system owner in this sense, is basically a support organization. You know, I mean, they work together, but still you should, as Celine was saying, like the KPIs in some sense, yeah, they're working, in others they're not, but you have to keep it separate. And like the support organization needs to realize that the internal communications or any other are basically their customers, who in the end might not be paying for that. You know, it's one company, but you have to act the way that they are, you know, and that you're providing a certain level.
Mm-hmm. Great, perfect ideas. Thank you very much, both of you. I promise to give the stage to whoever from all of our other people joining want to ask anything besides the chat. So if we have 2 minutes left, if you want to ask something or just react to something that was said, please go ahead, unmute yourself now. It's your time, so that I don't take all the space with my questions and my problems around tools. Does anyone want to say anything? Otherwise, I have many questions and I still can go on. Yeah, I see Diana unmuting.
Yes. I have one more question. That one is connected to the training on the use of tools, and it's connected to the fact that, for instance, like we're referring here a lot to intranets. You have people who consume the content that is there, but you have also people who put content there. And what I've seen a lot of times is that people from the teams who are supposed to put content as well, they expect some kind of a training. For instance, me in internal comms, I had to somehow find my own way, experiment, learn myself. And no one actually gave a training to me. But then I hear from different sites that people expect it, and otherwise they just don't want to go there and try themselves and so on. And what to do in that case? Because, for instance, if you have an organization that has a couple of thousands of people, and in every team there should be someone putting content there, then organizing training for everyone, that sounds like you can open an additional company just to deliver those trainings, right? So how to handle this? What to do?
Yeah, I think training is definitely an important element, but it is just one way of how people actually consume information and knowledge, right? So some people will need a training session because otherwise they're just not going to dive in and they're not going to bother, and they just want somebody to tell them how it works. So you can provide that in like live sessions. Like I had lots of companies pre-COVID days that did roadshows. Definitely helps. You can always do recordings, especially in these days. I'd say that will work as well. There needs to be some form of like written training as well. Quick guidelines, quick links or whatever. It could be some gamification to get people into the tool, right? Like go in and find whatever, an Easter egg somewhere into the solution. So just to make sure that people go into it. So like acknowledge that people learn in different ways, and then tie like training towards all of these different ways of learning. But I think there's enough solutions out there that can help you do this at scale, to be honest.
I don't think that you should leave like people wander about and do like whatever they want, because otherwise it's going to end up in a mess. You know, I think I agree. What we do usually with the systems that we have in our company, we usually have recorded trainings, etc. During the implementation phase. We write some kind of summary, some kind of a guidebook or something, so that people are behaving in the same way. You can do that. You can leave people like wander about, but in the end, they're going to spend more time on it. And in a company with thousands of employees, it's every minute counts. And in the end, it's going to be quite a lot of man days that you have wasted only on implementation of a project. And in the end, the training session in the end could be in the long run more expensive than the implementation itself.
Great. Thank you very much to both of you. Unfortunately, we are now over time, so there is no space for another questions. I'm sure we could use yet another hour. So just to give you a space for any final words, Celine and Ondra, if you want to say something before I close up the whole thing.
Just want to say thank you. I think there was great discussions. I think overall, it is never just about implementing a tool. There's a lot more around it, and like realizing that and making sure that as a company you're aligned, you're already one step ahead of a lot of other companies. So I think there's definitely a lot of hope for anyone listening to this who needs to jump into this or fix something that potentially went wrong in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with Celine, and thank you very much for having me here and letting me speak here. Thank you for that.
Well, many thanks to you, to both of you. Many great points. I made mental notes and I will rewatch just to be sure I implement and launch everything properly. Just one last thing before we say goodbye, we would like to invite you all for the next webinar, which will be in 2 weeks. And that one will be focused more on the tools and channels themselves. It's called Between Intranet and Instant Messenger, but we will cover more than just these two tools. So you are very much invited. Feel free to register if you haven't done so. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for the lively discussion in the chat as well, for all your questions. And we will be looking forward to you next time or during the next webinars, which are running until May. Thanks a lot once again. Have a great rest of the day. Hope it's sunny everywhere, so enjoy and see you.
Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.